Hello, everybody. This is Smiles Lewis, and you have tuned in to another live edition of the Anomaly Archives monthly virtual online meetup. For those of you not familiar with us, the Anomaly Archives Scientific Anomaly Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit community organization founded in 2003 by myself and a number of other folks here in Austin, Texas. And our mission and goals are the preservation of research materials, correspondence, popular literature, etc., all things having to do with the study of the anomalous, whether this be the nature of consciousness and its many altered forms, psychic phenomena, parapsychology, especially UFOs, unidentified flying objects, aka unidentified aerial phenomena, as it's now being called, UAP. And we are headquartered here in Austin, Texas, in the heart of the big state, and we've been around, like I say, since 2003. Back in the beginning of this year, we started a new monthly in-person meetup that lasted for a couple of, or at least one meeting before this current COVID crisis descended on us, and so we've had to adapt like everybody else, and so we have moved into the realm of online virtual meetups, and we are also going to be launching very soon a new series of similar online events. We're going to be doing some probably weekly news roundup shows with some co-hosts, friends, and local talent, as well as launching a new interview series. And some of the people you'll be seeing in a little while today will undoubtedly become some of our first guests on those new interview shows here for the Anomaly Archives. Today is going to be a very interesting presentation. We have a number of guests who have an interest in a researcher, an artist, an experiencer, a psychic clairvoyant who we've all had brushes with in our life and who we think deserves a much wider audience to know about her. We're going to be speaking about Eugenia Macer's story. Not everybody is that familiar with her, and that's, again, why we think that she's a perfect subject for discussing her life experience and her voluminous output of creative work, both in terms of art, poetry, theater, but also the many books, some of which you can see behind me, and that we'll be talking and touching upon here today. Let's see. It was just a few weeks ago when I was on Facebook and saw one of today's presenters mentioning the work of Eugenia Macer's story. That is Dr. C.S. Matthews, and she was speaking about Eugenia's work, and another friend who's going to be a guest here in just a little bit, Stephanie Quick, quickly chimed in with, "Hey, we should do a show together and do a live YouTube stream and talk about her work." And they'd collaborated before, Dr. Matthews and Stephanie, doing some internet streaming shows. And so I just had to interject and go, "Hey, I would love for the Anomaly Archives to host this if you would like that." And they seemed amenable. And then, of course, we brought in another friend who we'll be introducing momentarily, Ben Roylance, who's a poet and interested in, he's kind of become quite the Eugenia file, I guess is one way of putting it. So just briefly, I knew Eugenia since the late 1990s. We met through the alternative media zine scene back then when I was publishing my own zine from here in Austin, Texas, and we developed a quick friendship, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But as we proceed right now, I do want to read, this is a poem by Eugenia Macer's story from the volume 2 of the Hunter-Gatheress Journal produced by Joan Dark. Joan Dark being the publisher back in the day of Paranoia magazine, a really wonderful zine. And back up there you can see a copy of Hunter-Gatheress Volume 1. Eugenia is also in that, as well as the Paranoid Women Collect Their Thoughts, which Eugenia is in. These are also wonderful works that are available out there. So I'm not much of a poetry reader, so please forgive me. Eugenia, please forgive me. Master of Ceremonies. MC on Bleecker Street, almost alone, as your crowd dwindles the same as the other MCs crowd some years ago when we read duo, audience and poet. Under lights like doves in the photo exposure, colors moving in darkness above indistinct faces, where now I enter the air-conditioned room, just in time to hear a protest on the government of Zimbabwe. Presented by a well-fed U.S. poet in Bermuda shorts, shouting outward with the lights in his eyes, unaware. I entered late, sitting at the bar, the only audience watching amid people playing chess and waiting for the next act. Actually, not the ceremony I had come to collect, but what the hell? I was there. I watched. There's more poetry and material in this and the other works that we'll be discussing today. So without further ado, I'm going to briefly describe, we're going to proceed with, I'm going to introduce you to each of our presenters today, and then we'll actually have each of them do a brief presentation focused on what they particularly want to focus on, what they want to discuss about Eugenia Macer Story's works. And then after Dr. C.S. Matthews, Stephanie Quick, and Ben Roylance each do their piece, I'll come back and briefly tell you a little bit more about my friendship with Eugenia. And then we'll just move right into an open panel discussion on Eugenia and her works. And also at the end, we should be able to take questions and comments. And if you want to leave a comment or a question in the chat comment area over on our YouTube page where this is streaming, or the Facebook page where this is streaming, if we decide to choose your comment, let me see if I can get this working. We'll display it like this. So anyway, and so moving right along, our first guest presenter is going to be Dr. C.S. Matthews. Dr. Matthews has studied religion, new religious movements, occultism, and paranormal experiences for over 4 decades, has advanced degrees in religious studies and American cultural studies, and is an ardent environmentalist. Dr. M has practiced Sufism for 2 decades and also has studied Swedish-Finnish runes, shamanism, and Mid-Hudson Algonquin Indigenous traditions from native teachers. Additionally, Dr. M has been a journalist and has also published poetry, short stories, academic papers, and a textbook on new religious movements, and most recently, a survey of paranormal reports and experiences in the Hudson Valley called Mysterious Beauty, Living with the Paranormal in the Hudson Valley. And here is our guest presenter, Dr. Matthews. How are you today?
I'm good. Very frizzy here, but good.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to just say, I just briefly want to say how I came to be aware of you and your work was because of our other guest. Stephanie and I have been friends online for quite some time, and a couple of years back, she told me about this amazing dissertation or paper that you'd written back in, I guess it's 2001, on the African-American experience of the paranormal, often described as the shorthand of the alien abduction experience within the African-American community. And it's a fantastic and intriguing paper and subject that we'll have to have a whole discussion about at some point. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your interest in Eugenia, and I'll let you have the floor.
All right. Most of you, or many of you probably, did not know Eugenia. And the reason that I mentioned my hair is because Eugenia also talked about her hair quite a lot. She was as frustrated with it privately as I am with mine. So that's the only reason why I mention it. It's appropriate. That's part of the reason why she liked to stand in certain positions. As I went back through my materials, my correspondence with her, I realized that this was something that we had talked about, Smiles and I, and trying to figure out why, when you see her in photographs, she's standing in certain positions. And it's because she didn't like her hair, and she didn't like the way her face looked with her hair from certain positions. So I certainly understand that. What I'm going to do is give a very brief biography of Eugenia Macer's story, because I include that as the last and ultimate chapter in the book that I wrote about Hudson Valley paranormal experiences. And I wanted to write this biography of Eugenia simply because I felt that it wrapped up her life and her experience in Woodstock, sort of wrapped up the book in a really adequate way. And of course, obviously, you'll have to read that in order to see what I'm doing with it. But it's, to my knowledge, the first attempt at any kind of biography of hers. And so it will be important for anyone who's interested in her to continue that work, because there's still more to dig out about her. So a basic biography is she was born January 20th, 1945, which, by the way, is the same birthday with, I think, a year difference of David Lynch, the filmmaker. She was born in a military family. Both of her parents had met while they were both stationed in New Guinea in the Pacific arena of World War II. And she was born before the war was quite over. She was born in January of 1945, as I said. Her father remained in the military, so she was raised sort of a military brat, which meant that, they traveled from place to place. And she talks about that a lot in various of her autobiographical writings. But it enabled her to have a lot of contact with different people. And it also, she believed, it instilled in her kind of an itinerant sort of nature. In the 1950s, her father was assigned to convert an old tuberculosis hospital into a VA center. This was actually something that he had been assigned to do. And so he went around the country doing this. And this was up in Tupper Lake, which is not really in the Adirondacks proper, but it's close. It's up in there. And that was her first exposure to the Adirondacks and to the Catskill region, because, of course, her family traveled around the region to get to know it. And it was also the first location of her first odd experience that she remembered. I'm going to mention 3 odd experiences that she references in a couple of her autobiographical works that she regards as being absolutely foundational to her development as a person. And this first experience occurred sometime, she didn't know exactly when it was. It was sometime in the middle 50s. And she was playing by herself. I'm going to actually remind myself here of some of the details. She was about 11 to 12 years old. So this would have put her right, like in the late 50s. And she was playing by herself in some kind of a playground. It wasn't a playground, really. It was sort of a park. And while she was playing there, she recalls that she was approached by a very professional looking man. The way she described him was that he was dressed in a very dapper sort of way. And she remembered his appearance was very odd because it was very sudden. She did not see him walk up to her. It was just like he suddenly appeared to her. And she regarded this as curious because one of the things she always trusted in herself, as she puts it, was a kind of sixth sense that she had about danger. And she liked in a number of different interviews to talk about how that's how her natural clairvoyance manifested itself, that she just had this ability to sense if she was in danger. So this person just appeared to her. And according to her account, he handed her a business card, or what passed as a business card at the time, and said to her, keep in mind that he's an adult, or at least appearing that way, and she's like an 11 to 12-year-old young girl. And he passed her a business card and said to her, I'd like to do business with you. And then just walked off. Now, of course, hearing that story now, we would be seized with superstition about that or suspicion about that. But she apparently did not take that in a bad way. She never saw him again. She didn't follow up on the contact. But what she remembered was the oddness of his sudden appearance to her and the fact that he seemed to treat her as a separate human being. It was the first time in her life that she remembered being approached by an adult as a separate person, not somebody who was like an adjunct to somebody else. So that was like the first sort of experience that she remembers as kind of an interesting, odd experience. The second odd experience occurred many, many years later. She had gone on to college and had gotten a degree in English, I believe, and had become a sort of a cub journalist at a publication, it was a publishing house, really. They did a number of different types of publishing, newspapers, et cetera, in Wisconsin. And she had her own apartment, and the way she recalled it is that she was on her own for the first time, and she really enjoyed it a lot. She was the only surviving child of her parents. They'd had a younger son, a younger brother for her, but he had died. I guess he had never been very well, and so she was raised as sort of the only child, and but she enjoyed being on her own. And I just will read this passage to you because it was a very strange experience to her. One day when she was home from work, she heard the noise of a car pull up, and for some reason she felt the impulse to look outside. What she saw terrified and confused her. So she was on the bottom floor of an apartment building. Several men, all identically dressed in official-looking khaki uniforms. And keep in mind that, she was raised in a military family, so she was familiar with people dressed in official uniforms of one type or another. But according to her account, she didn't recognize these uniforms. They exited an old model beige vehicle, which sported a simple red flashing light on top. That was sort of like police, but not police. They appeared to be heading directly for her apartment, and furthermore looked like they were fanning out to surround all entrances and windows. She had no idea who they were or what they wanted, and they clearly didn't look like local law enforcement. According to her account, she was terrified into almost a kind of paralysis, and as quickly as she could, made her way to a back room where there was a phone so that she could call the actual police, because she recognized that these were not normal police. She sat stiffly on the bed, holding the phone receiver beneath her, trying not to move, and yet aware that the men could see her through the back window. She heard one of them say, "Oh, it's all right. She's only making love to her pillow." In her panic, Eugenia had grabbed a pillow to further cover up the fact that she was preparing to call the police. At that point, apparently, once one of them said that, they apparently just all sort of stood up and walked away and then disappeared. And she recalled that this incident had a strange visceral effect on her awareness and consciousness, precisely because it didn't make any sense. Who were these men, and on what or whose authority did they simply surround her home and peer into her private world? And then what did the comment mean? And she was never able to determine what this was about. It's almost like a Men in Black experience, except they weren't men in black, they were men in khaki, which is very strange. So that's the second experience that she remembers as really standing out to her. And the reason why that's important is when she has her important and seminal UFO experience a few years later, in her book, I believe it is Doing Business in the Adirondacks, which I think once I reread all of her stuff for this, I realized, oh, this guy had handed her a business card that said, "I want to do business with you." And then later on, she entitles one of her books, Doing Business in the Adirondacks. I don't think that that's a coincidence. But in that book, when she talks about her UFO experience, she specifically sort of references that weird experience with the khaki guys, because on some level, she came to believe that they were connected in some way, but she never knew exactly how or why. So the first UFO experience that she had, or the most important one, occurred in 1973. She had graduated. She'd gotten an MFA at Columbia University. In fact, this experience with the khaki guys had inspired her to go back to graduate school. And she had already written a play, or kind of I guess it was sort of a screenplay play about that involved paranormal experiences. And they actually had accepted it first at Yale in their drama department. But then she decided, because of a strange series of experiences that she had at Yale, that she was going to go to Columbia, because they also accepted this play and accepted her for matriculation. So she actually went through their MFA program, got a degree in drama and drama writing. And that's a large chunk of what she did for the rest of her life, no matter what else she was doing. She was doing dramatic presentations, writing and directing and producing avant-garde plays, essentially. So she had been living in the New York area for a while, and she was trying to decide whether she should move to Boston or live in New York, or what she was doing. So she did go to Boston for a little while. And while she was in Boston, the following thing happened. She was standing on a train platform outside of Boston, waiting to catch a late commuter line on a Sunday evening. She actually worked at this time, so she worked in the evenings. It was December 30th, 1973, when she spotted a, quote, dilating UFO light, which suddenly became a V-shaped formation of smaller UFO lights. The entire display appeared, disappeared, and then reappeared some 50 or 60 yards from the train platform. Eugenia goes on to say that although she had come from a family of psychics who took altered states of consciousness and otherworldly encounter as part of their common shared experience, and as indicated, had had some odd experiences already in her life, she was not prepared for the effects the sighting had on her. She found herself, subsequent to this, suddenly becoming interested in books on electromagnetism, physics, and mathematics. She began having very strange and vivid dreams about UFOs, and would often awaken to a strange humming sound that others didn't seem to hear, but to which animals would sometimes react. She regards this experience as being the experience that opened her wide to an entirely new way of understanding the possibilities of the physical and non-physical world. When she talks about her experience in her first UFO book, Congratulations, the UFO Reality, or You've Seen UFOs, what does she say? Congratulations, the New UFO Reality, which she published in 1978. She talks about how this experience. Thank you very much. There it goes. She talked about how the experience completely. It caused a kind of download of information in her. It was like suddenly she had capacities that she didn't know that she'd had before. And she became interested in books on physics and electromagnetics and mathematics and engineering, stuff that she had, not only never been interested in before, but couldn't have been able to read. And so she began to voluminously consume this kind of material, even while she was reading other kinds of things, metaphysical things and artistic things. And that began sort of her career into the history of, or the mystery of, I should say, not so much the history, but the mystery of the UFO experience as kind of an indicator of the larger realities. And her book that Smiles just showed you, that book is important because it's the first book of its kind. Basically what she did for the next few years of her life as she struggled through a divorce, a very unpleasant divorce, I might add, and struggled to raise a son by herself and remain an artist. She moved back to New York. What she did was she wrote this book as her kind of memoir and record of various UFO people, if you will, people who'd had their own experiences that she met along the way, and what the effect, the social and personal effect of these experiences were on their lives, on their consciousnesses. This is the kind of thing that, John Keel was writing about and Jacques Vallée was writing about. But they didn't know she was writing about it either. And it's really the first book that I've encountered that asks some of the really important questions about what is this experience? How is it connected to other kinds of paranormal experiences and the psychic capacity? How is this connected to the occult? She talks about that quite a lot. She and John Keel are two of the first people who really sort of, put their finger on that connection. And it's a fascinating book. And what's interesting about the book is the book itself has an odd trajectory. It's one of the few of her books that was actually published by a publisher that was not her. She self-published most of her material. And not like literally within a week or two, not long after the book was published, after it became available, the warehouse that was housing all of her copies of the book for that publisher, that warehouse burned to the ground. And almost all copies of the book were lost. So the only books that were saved were books that had already been distributed, had already gone out into the world, and she had a few of them herself. So that's part of the reason why that book is kind of hard to find. But it's really fascinating, and in her subsequent work, she kind of thinks back on that occurrence and thinks that it's odd. She had this experience and she publishes this book and then it's like it gets taken from her in a strange way. She has that kind of struggle throughout her life as she moves forward. But we'll talk more about that as we go. So those are like the three principal main experiences that led to her creative activity. Now, one of the things that I did want to read, and this is from her book, Dark Frontiers, which is formed the poster that Smiles put up to advertise this. This is how she saw herself. Actually, I am a spy for the future in noting down this maze of occult and overt interconnections, and I do hope my work will be accessed and understood as a demo model of how the individual consciousness exists within a nexus of subtle and time variable causalities. So that's something to think about as we go forward. Now, briefly, how I knew her or where I met her. I first became aware of her when I was reading through the interviews in Andrew Colvin's Mothman Photographer's books. And I found her to be really interesting. There's a fairly extensive interview in one of the volumes that Andy does. And then she was also a member of a Facebook group that he started called, I can't remember, what is it, the Mothy or something. And because I don't clue into that all the time anymore because I don't have a lot of time. But I had some interactions with her on that Facebook group, and through those interactions came to find out that she only lived at the time about 9 miles from where I lived. She lived in Woodstock, and I lived in Saugerties at the time. And so we had some interaction, and we resolved that we would try to meet at some point. It never turned out that we met, actually, although we had a number of Facebook interactions, and except that we did meet once. I had gone into Woodstock for some other thing. I was going to the grocery store there. There's like a natural food store called Sunflower, and I was pulling into the parking lot, and there she was. She came out of the store. And I saw her, and I recognized her because of her hair. I saw her, and I slammed on my brakes, drove up to her and slammed on my brakes and scared the crap out of her. Felt really bad about that. But then I jumped out of the car, and I introduced myself, and she recognized me immediately. And we had a little bit of an exchange. She didn't seem to be really physically very well during that time period. When I met her, she seemed to be sort of overheated, and she seemed to be having some trouble breathing. She sounded like she'd been running or something, but she didn't look like she had been. So I kept the conversation short. But what she did do is she handed me her business card, which I still have. And she said, we need to talk. Because we had had all these conversations about runes and Sufis and occultism and just all kinds of stuff. And she was telling me about the talismans that would show up outside of her house. And the last communication I had with her was she Facebooked me to see whether or not she knew of anyone who needed any psychic readings or knew of anyone who would be interested in purchasing her house. She was having some financial issues. And then I didn't hear from her. And we found out later, about a month later, and it was maybe about 3 or 4 months after I had last spoken with her, that she had passed. And that was, it was in December. I believe it was December 9th. I think it was December 9th. Of 2013. And the reason that that's actually significant, and I hope I'm getting the date right, is because there's an individual who now lives in Phoenicia, New York, who lived in Woodstock at the time. And she's an artist. Her name is Christina Varga. And Eugenia had befriended her. She had a gallery at the time, Christina did, in Woodstock. And Christina had befriended her. And after Eugenia died, her son, Eugenia's son, gave Christina all of these unfinished oil paintings that Eugenia, or some were finished, but a lot of them were not, that Eugenia had started. She also did a lot of painting. So one of the things that Christina did with that is, first of all, she did a memorial service. That's where most of us who knew Eugenia found out that she had passed. She had a memorial service, and a lot of these paintings that had been given were displayed in her gallery. And so that's how I got to know Christina. I have since I've kept in contact with Christina, and some of the things, in fact, I had a conversation with her this morning, letting her know about this. But one of the things that Christina does is what she calls post-mortem collaborations with Eugenia. And this is actually a painting that I have. Let's see if I can bring it a little closer without dropping it. This is a painting that I have that is one of these post-mortem collaborations. What you can see in this is this blue here, this blue turquoise, this face here. This is part of what Eugenia did here. And then this Saturn up here at the top, that is Eugenia. And then there's also another face down here in a circle, which might be kind of hard to see, that is Eugenia. There's some lines here that are part of Eugenia. So that's, in other words, those are the things that Eugenia painted. And then what Christina will do is she will take that basic painting and she'll just sort of, as she puts it, sort of tune in, because she experiences Eugenia around her quite a lot. And then she will feel like she's directed to add certain things to it. So in this case, we have sort of a travel motif with maps and this a Rubik's Cube, which I thought was really interesting. And whoever this dude is, if that's a dude, I don't know if that's a dude or not, looks like sort of a Chinese dwarf character of some type. I have no idea what it is. But anyway, if you actually come closer to the picture, there's actually a face right there, you can see the portions that Eugenia contributed, sort of coming out from underneath the surface of what Christina placed with it. And underneath here it says Eugenia Macer's story, and then Christina Varga puts her signature off to the side. So she's done a number of these, actually, quite a lot of these. Eugenia often did very big pictures. Not all of her pictures are big, but often did some big ones. And so Christina still has a number of these sort of around that she works on every now and then. And what she's told me is that they'll just sort of hang out, and what ends up happening is that all of a sudden she'll be seized with kind of an impulse to work on them. And when she starts working on one, Eugenia will really be very present to her in a lot of ways, and not tell her exactly what to do with the paintings, but she'll really feel kind of an inspiration there. So I wanted to finish my little presentation with another poem of Eugenia's. One of the things that I got to do at the memorial service, and I found out about it just at the last minute, so I was really happy I was able to be there. When all the people that I met there at the memorial service were all people from all the other facets of Eugenia's life. People who had known her as a playwright, as a poet, as an artist, or as a philosopher, as an intellectual. People who had known her through her publications, where she talks about her principal metaphysical concept or construct called the fluidus matrix. And I was the only person there that had known her from the paranormal community. And so I was the person that sort of represented the paranormal community to everybody else. And so I got to read a poem, a couple poems that she had written about UFOs specifically. Now, I don't have those specific poems, but I do have this poem. And this is a poem in the book, Crossing Jungle River, which is actually a hard book to find, of hers. And this is called Skunk Star. Smell of the unseen, deep trails beneath built foundations of the house lead the skunk hunter to windows. Looking out, nothing's there, but a new bright star shines alone in dark, foggy sky. Great image. Okay, smiles.
That was great. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthews. And I'm so glad that you were able to be there to represent that part of her life, because and I think it's beautiful and amazing to me that people can be so prolific in various fields, and of course the esoteric occult field, the hidden part of their life, is often the weird part of their life. That's not to say that other parts of her life weren't equally weird. I'm not sure. I didn't know her in all those other respects per se, but I too actually was blessed to present the para side of a close friend of mine at his memorial, and it was similar. Like, I mean, there was other friends there who knew of his paranormal sides, but that's great. Thank you so much for the presentation, and especially for getting to see the painting as well. So next up is going to be my good friend Stephanie Quick, who I met finally face to face several years after first encountering her online. She reached out to me and my co-host of one of the web radio shows that I've done over the years, and we became fast friends, and I've always appreciated her area of interest, and over the years discovered her interest in experimenting with and documenting synchronicity, and in fact, she did some very interesting and worthwhile to look into synchronicity experiments that we'll probably talk about separately on a whole other show soon. Hey, Stephanie, how you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for putting this together, and also to Dr. Matthews and Ben for coming along too.
Absolutely. And so let me officially bring you on with your bio here. As a girl, Stephanie Quick found herself captivated by the stories contained in the alien eyeballed covers of Strangely Enough. Aside from the odd levitation, she didn't get much in the way of actual experience of the strange until a near-death experience at the age of 21. This event and following esoteric practices taught by the entities encountered in her NDE resulted in a wide range of high strange events, including premonitions, empathic communication with the dead and the living, telepathic communication with trees, missing time with a gnome, and an outrageous number of synchronicities. Using models from anthropology, the humanities, and esoteric theory, Quick endeavors to develop new questions and understanding about the world of the high strange, not just as an intellectual exercise, but in order to help interested people, experiencers or not, gain insight into these phenomena. And I think she's doing a great job at that. You can find more of her writing and thoughts and links to the many podcast interviews and co-hosting events that she's done at her blog, Ghost Dog is a Mystery Box, which is one of the greatest titles ever for such an endeavor. So, Stephanie, thank you, and I'll take it away.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm really excited about this. I learned about Eugenia through Dr. Matthews in her book, Mysterious Beauty. I had been a fan of hers in her AKA as Wham co-host of the Church of Mavis radio show for a number of years. And then we started to interact. I was on the show, and then her book came out, and I just love the whole thing. It's very influenced by Keel and Valet, and she has a wonderful chapter on Eugenia Macer's story, who I'd never heard of before. And she's just Eugenia is just an amazing woman and an incredible presence. And I felt some similarities with her. I'm only not sporting the same hair as her and Wham because this is less than 10 hours after I washed my hair, so it hasn't had time to frizz up yet. Which is interesting because I'm going to be speaking about her, Eugenia's interest in synchronicities. And then she developed this theory based on physics, electromagnetism, space-time dimensions, basically a technical theory called the fluidus or fluidice matrix theory, where she... And now, as Small said, I've been interested in synchronicities very heavily and experimenting with them for over 15 years now. And so they raise a number of questions, which she addresses, not just on kind of like in a logical or rhetorical format, but she goes into the current physics and maths and looking at the different forces involved in creating our universe. And has developed this theory, which I don't have that background. I have some science background, but not in that arena. So I'm going to be talking around that because she has formulas spread out and everything. And I mean, as they say, it's all Greek to me, to be corny about it. But I think that she's a lot smarter than I am. I figured reading of this. She is very precise with language. She has a gift for insightful and illuminating analogy. So hopefully we'll be able to give you a better idea about synchronicity and some of the ideas that she had about it. One of the things that I really like about her approach to this area of the paranormal is that, well, let's start with defining synchronicity. This is a concept that Jung came up with. The idea is, to say it shortly, it is a meaningful coincidence. So in your location, within a small area of time, you are going to see something happen that, or sometimes two things or more, that obviously have a distinct meaning connection. And so this can go from anywhere from like a library angel, you're really looking for a book or you're looking for an answer to something. And I mean, sometimes with people, the book will literally fall out of the bookcase in front of them. For those of us who need a little more encouragement, I guess. Or someone will suggest it to you, or things like that. You run into the person who can give you just the right contact information for a job that you're trying to search for, that type of thing. I was on a show talking about synchronicities recently with Rojan Razorwar and David Metcalf, and Rojan told a great story about a synchronicity. He had a falling out with his mom, and this is the condensed version, many years before. So he's at work one day, and a cousin of his came in that he hadn't seen for a while, so they exchanged phone numbers. As it happened, within a week or two, his cousin just happened to take a trip after this to some place where they end up like in the middle of nowhere at this gas station for some reason. At the same time, his mom had been on a bus trip. The bus's toilet broke down, so they had to pull into this gas station for a pit stop, which is where his mom met the cousin, and his mom got Rojan's phone information, was able to contact him. Which is a pretty great synchronicity on its own, because you can see how unusual it is for these events to be happening in the same space and time, right? The cousin is at this gas station where the mom just happens to be because, the bus broke down. And the cousin had been talking to Rojan earlier and managed to get his phone information. Interestingly enough, and this is something that happens with a lot of synchronicities that happen by themselves, and also synchronicities that cluster around things, for example, like flying saucer encounters. You'll see that they have these kind of knock-on effects, because a couple weeks later, Rojan was again at work, and a guy comes in, fills out an application, and says, "Can you hire me?" And Rojan says, "No, because you're my father," who he hadn't seen for decades. So suddenly it's like all of a sudden, bingo, there is all these family connections coming together very unusually. So that would be a great and more involved type of synchronicity. There's a billion different types. Jung was talking about them, and he liked to use the word regarding synchronicities that they were acausal. But what I like about Eugenia Macer's story is that she's like, no, we can see that there is a relationship, that there are these patterns. If you are of a scientific bent, you realize that observing patterns in the outside world is the first step in trying to formulate any hypotheses that then you can test and see, well, maybe you were imagining it, or it's due to something else or whatever. But until you perform those experiments, you won't really know. Until you form the hypothesis, you can't go forward. And so I really appreciate that she did that. She did it very, I want to say strictly. That's not the exact word, but it'll have to do. So one more word about synchronicities. One of the reasons that I got into studying them is because it's very difficult to study the paranormal generally, because a lot of these things are very spontaneous. Poltergeists, spontaneous, only happen for a while, usually. Ghosts, flying saucers, who the heck knows? They won't, follow the FAA and land where at an airport or anything. So you can never, how can you study something when you never know you're going to be there when it shows up, right? And a nice thing about synchronicities is that they tend to cluster around paranormal phenomena, like a person will have, for example, Eugenia right there. What's interesting about some of these experiences that she had, like with the men in beige, I guess we'll call them MIBs, men in beige, is that she had something that happens to a lot of people that see flying saucers, where she had an impulse to go look outside for no reason, right? This is oftentimes the first thing that happens in a flying saucer encounter. So that type of premonition or synchronicity, or whatever you want to call it, tends to cluster around before and after people surrounding these kind of various paranormal events. So my hypothesis has been that they partake of kind of the same substance. And so if we study synchronicities, which are a lot easier to get to happen, than, for example, manifesting an entire flying saucer that kidnaps someone, although Ted Owens claimed to be able to do that, then we could find kind of get a foot in the door in terms of studying some of these spontaneous paranormal phenomena. So one of the things that I find fascinating most about synchronicity, and that Eugenia did as well, is the phenomena called transduction. And I was so happy to read this word first, because it's to me the thing that I think will give us insight into what's happening. And her fluid ice matrix phenomenon addresses transduction, because transduction is the idea that you have a signal or energy that's going through various forms, and it retains a certain integrity as that same energy. For example, I guess a classic example is you have sound waves, like in the air. They hit your ear. Your eardrum converts them to neurological impulses, nerve impulses that travel to the brain. The brain processes it as sound for you. So there is a pattern that is happening in the larger environment that comes to you as sound. And but it has this integrity to it. For example, as we're broadcasting right now, right? There's an image of me that my camera's picking up. Is going through computers and fiber optics and being distributed and then re-manifest as an image on, your device that you're watching at now. That's another example of transduction, because it's not like a picture of me getting sent through the mail that you're opening up at your end of things, right? It's going through these very different forms. If you just cut a fiber optic wire and went and stared at it, even though I'm going through it, you're not going to recognize that that's what's happening. So this can happen in synchronicity in various ways. Usually you'll see that there's like a symbol language or symbols that you're able to follow through, or a logical, let's say a pattern, a similar pattern that keeps cropping up. One example I would like to talk about now is one that happened to me many years ago. I was in my previous apartment, which was kind of backed on some woods, and I had the back door open. I'm laying on the couch reading this book about the Nazca lines, and I see a black and white illustration of one of the pieces of art that has been made on the Nazca plain, and it's of a hummingbird. And I was looking at it, and I was wondering, because I've always fed hummingbirds, and I like them a lot, because it's kind of outstretched with its, like laying down with its beak out, and then its two wings out to the side. And I thought, I wonder why they did it that way, because this is such a striking, unusual pose, but I've never seen a hummingbird in that position. I watch it kind of obsessively. So I had this, let's see, you have the three-dimensional drawing book, graphic, right? Symbol, not language. It's coming to my mind, and I've generated a question that's in my mind. I'm by myself. I'm not mumbling. It's not going out anywhere. I got a little hungry. I was thinking about this cheese that we had in the refrigerator, to be quite frank. So I stood up and I hear this buzzing sound, and we had these windows that had, that were kind of like set back. So they'd have like a little edge there. And there was a male Anna's hummingbird who got into the house. That's the only time he ever did. And he was kind of buzzing up and down the edge, trying to get out. So I grabbed him. I didn't grab him. I very gently got him in my hand, carried him out like this outdoors, and opened my palm. And before he flew away, he was in that exact position of the Nazca line hummingbird. So there you have the transduction of this whole idea of a hummingbird in this particular position, going from a page in a book to, in my mind, to you have like a living creature enacting this same image. So these are the things that become difficult to address in our current ideas about kind of space-time reality and how they work. So now I'm going to try and explain the fluid ice matrix to you. I'm looking at the comments here, so if you are getting real lost or I'm not making any sense, feel free to write something in there. I'll try and see if I can address it. So basically, she had noticed some things. One of the things that she had noticed was that when you have an instance of telepathy or PK, she was thinking, if this depended upon an outbreak of energy in the traditional kind of electromagnetic four-dimensional space-time reality, material reality that we normally are thinking that moving in, that basically you would expect there to be like outbreaks of spontaneous combustion or small explosions or these type of things. Also, she was she was flying in a small plane with a guy over a place that had a magnetic anomaly in Alaska. And I know enough about engines to know that certain of the devices can depend upon magnetics. Most of them don't. So she was noticing that they were flying over this magnetic anomaly that was very apparent looking at the compass. The plane did not, the engines didn't break down or stop working, even though the compass was going crazy. So she's like, okay, there's something else that maybe is kind of magnetic, or is kind of, as she has, I think, determined in the works of hers that I read, maybe gravity-based. That is where this push is coming for things to impact on 4D. So basically, this is the fluid ice matrix as I understand it. You have 4D space-time reality, right? So you have your 3 dimensions, then you have time on top of that, and that is where we mostly live here as far as our material existence, and where a lot of these paranormal phenomenon enact themselves. I'm scrolling down here on the things a little bit. Okay. So you have to consider that. Then you have the realm of what we would call the imaginal, which sounds like imaginary, but it's more, I think a good example in this space is, I can show you a bunch of mathematical equations on a piece of paper. That's not math. Math is that's not math happening. Math happening is when you are manipulating those mental concepts, because I could show you those equations, but you may not grasp them, right? So that's not the actual thing happening. The actual thing is whatever, Einstein or some mathematician is doing in their head, working in that space. That's the imaginal. That's what you have to take math classes or physics classes to get basically initiated into this realm of the thought universe. So you have the 4D reality, and then you have the imaginal, the thought universe. Let me read this thing. Mackenzie, I'm hopefully getting there. Please bear with me. Thank you. That's a good idea. A good point. Then you have what she called 5D, which is the fluidized matrix. And this is something that is maybe magnetic. I think she was thinking more in most of the papers I read that it was kind of more having to do with like a gravity force, possibly, or something beyond our normal electromagnetic spectrum. It is a taking place in the nano level, which is kind of like inside, very much inside atoms and these small particles. But at the same time, it is kind of a matrix or interconnected netting that is emerging from this very small space, but also enveloping this space and able to interact with both the realm of the mental, the imaginal, and physical, solid material reality. So, this is interesting to me because when I first thought of this, when I first read about it, I'm interested in a certain amount of esoteric theory, and it sounded very similar, as I said, to the imaginal realm, or what some people might call the astral or mental realm, and the etheric, which is basically concepts from the occult, where you have something that you're just thinking about or imagining. When you want to you push that mental structure into the physical, it can go through the etheric, which is kind of like this mid space that when you end up doing, like, say, channeling or mediumship or doing PK effects, various other psychic phenomena, you can definitely feel it, and people can connect with that. I'm not sure what lab experiments have been done as far as trying to verify any type of electromagnetic effect or whatever, but so there's this whole idea that you have this another dimension, which is in a matrix form. So things are very interconnected, and information can kind of travel non-locally between these nano spots in the atoms. I'm already blowing it here. I would encourage anyone, if you could run across any of her articles, she does a great job of explaining it, and she's a very clear writer. So she has a number of examples and formulas that talk about this and say, okay, if this were true, then, which is the beauty of it, because she uses this not just to kind of say, well, I have this airy-fairy theory, but she's like, okay, if this is so, you would expect to see X, Y, Z. And so some of her examples, before I get to that, she has a great example, I thought, or analogy of how this matrix could influence the physical. And so the way she lays it out is that she saw an example of a domino pattern that some people had laid out, and it looked like just a bunch of dominoes standing up, right? Then you have the big reveal of all these pieces standing there. You just tip over one domino and it reveals, in her case that she was watching, was a dragon. And she made the point that when you have intelligence on either end working this, she says, there could be at the 6D intelligence, 4D intelligence communicating, you can have a pattern that's revealed, that's encoded in whatever matrix, like with the dominoes, and a very small physical effect can reveal that pattern. So let's say, well, in Rojan's example of meeting his mom, as it turned out, his mother was very hot on wanting to get back in touch with him at the time that this synchronicity happened. So you could have the idea that she encoded in this fluid ice matrix the strong intention that she would meet Rojan again. So this is kind of activating this whole matrix, and then at a certain point something happens and she's able to activate it. And so you can have all these very disparate non-local effects popping up. Oh, the cousin going to see him, the bus breaking down at the exact right moment to meet up with the cousin. You have these non-local phenomena that are very meaningful and that would seem to be connected somehow to any sensible person. I mean, I know there's supposed to be the law of big numbers, but some of these things, I think they're pushing it a little bit because they haven't, Anyway, so she predicts some other things that are happening here, or that should happen given this. And she talks, because this all has to do, I'm going to get crazy here again. This all has to do with the nature of space-time. Because when she was talking about this being possibly gravity-based or linked to gravity, the fluid ice matrix, this 5D matrix, I was thinking, because gravity, is it local or is it non-local? Because it seems non-local because the sun is affecting us, but it's like way the heck away there. It takes minutes for light to even get here from there. That's kind of a long way. So I was looking it up, and as near as I can figure, space-time, gravity works locally according to space-time, but space-time is not what we think it is. Because there's no absolute locations in space. It just has to do with relative objects, how they're excuse me. I had Lyme disease many years ago, and sometimes my brain just goes on the blink. So thank you for bearing with me. I should be okay now. You have objects, and location has to do with their relative position to one another, right? To go to your grandma's house because it's right down the street from that 7-Eleven. Your grandma's house is, moving through a universe at, however fast we're going around the sun and through the galaxy, and the galaxies move through the universe. And there is no place in the universe where you could get outside of it and say, okay, it's all in this Cartesian box, right? So everything has to do with its relationship to one another. And so what this means is that space-time itself is kind of not, again, Cartesian. It's a very kind of fuzzy, fluid phenomenon where you have things interacting with each other. So she found and predicted certain things. She was saying that as far as landscape anomalies, like a window area, we would be thinking of, where you have like a lot of paranormal phenomena. She also included luck as another thing, like I guess good luck or bad luck, as being associated with these areas. She said that they would have areas with crystalline deposits, water, and steep altitude differentials, which is fascinating to me because one of the places that I've known personally, where I've been many times, that is just haunted beyond imagining and belief, is a place called Nevada City in California, in the old gold rush area, and it has all those things. It's huge amounts of quartz crystals in the granite, has water flowing through there, and steep altitude differentials because it's just coming up to the Sierra Nevadas there, which is a kind of a new mountain range. But yeah, I've seen everything from there, from like ghost fires, that this one house was seeming to be on fire so often, and people were calling in so often, the fire department would go there and nothing was burning, that the fire department stopped answering calls from that house. Full body apparitions seen by numerous people, poltergeists that push people downstairs, or that might have been a ghost actually, ghost chicken, just like everything. I mean, literally, you walk down the street and people are stopping you. Oh yeah, this ghost here. So it's interesting and that shows the power of her theory is that she makes these predictions, and it's not just because she kind of noticed these things, but she's saying in that the physical properties associated with these particular conditions in our material world should facilitate this particular type of transference. She also talks about catalysis, or when you have, for example, oxidation, rust, or burning a candle, and that the properties involved in these processes should also facilitate the fluidized matrix being able to communicate between the mental realms and the physical realms. And she gives some examples there. One was she moved into a new space, and there was an old pipe there, which was fine. She used it as kind of a makeshift candle holder to burn a candle and do kind of a clearing or blessing ceremony. And then I guess within a matter of weeks or months, this piece of pipe became incredibly rusted, and she's wondering about possible activation of her mental and coherence, and through the candle, facilitating the fluidized matrix to kind of cause a contagion of rust or a catalysis on this pipe. Who knows? So let me see what else here. She talks about also feng shui, ritual altars, theaters, and plays. The physical arrangement of circumstances is of maximum importance in actualizing the mentally formulated goals. Again, here she's getting at the idea of the matrix and its relationship to the structure of space-time. I don't even know if I'm making any sense here, but we have all seen this when you have you're doing a sweat lodge, right? You need to orient it properly according to the cardinal directions and everything. According to her theory, this is to help facilitate the transfer between dimensions. She also talks about how there is living intelligence in all of these dimensions, and that the fifth dimension, the fluidized matrix, can be a portal or means for intelligence to communicate through symbol and through structures. An example she gives that I think is kind of interesting is when she's talking about computation using a slide rule. I don't know if you remember that anymore, but it's a device where you can, it's kind of a little bit similar to an abacus. Not quite. A slide rule is a better analogy, but it's a device that's made up so that you can use it to perform certain calculations by moving the pieces together. It's just like wood or plastic with notations on it. But she was talking about how you need to have intelligence kind of on both ends, on the end that thought of it and created it, but then again, you need to be initiated into how to use it so that you can divine the intelligence behind it. So I think that's an interesting avenue to look at from a lot of these paranormal experiences, because a lot of them, people have very strong feelings that they are contacting other intelligences, and so the idea is, how do you communicate with another person? Like if they're speaking another language, obviously that's going to make it difficult. So there's that whole element of how to recognize intelligence. So I think I'm looking at the time. I don't want to step on Ben. Smiles, what do you think?
Hey, I think we could spend hours and hours exploring the fluidous matrix. It's one of those areas where I haven't had the chance to dive in to devote the time that I think is necessary to really truly understand it. Plus, it's so complicated. One of the papers that I recently was rescanning is that I shared with y'all, Breathing Light, Breathing Time. I think this is only one of a couple or more, maybe several papers that she presented at the annual conference of the United States Psychotronics Association, and that's psychotronics, meaning the interfacing of electromagnetics, electronics, and human consciousness in the nervous system. These were all areas that just she explored in her papers and in her books, and really give you that rounded approach that she took to everything. So I think we're good. We can I think we can go on, and we'll thank you so much, Stephanie, and
Thank you.
we'll talk about synchronicity some more undoubtedly in this conversation. So.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Coming up next is our third guest presenter. Ben Roylance is a bookseller and poet from Allentown, Pennsylvania. He runs the book-selling entity Aport Used Books. That's Aport, Apport. Aport Used Books. Great stuff. Mostly active on Instagram. He is currently at work on the Eugenia Macer Story Reader, a selection of her works in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. He is co-host of the new High Strangeness podcast, Consensus Unreality, which what I've listened to so far I really am enjoying. And so I want to bring on Ben here. Hey, Ben, how's it going?
Hey, going pretty good.
Thanks for hanging in there, and we're so glad to have you. And I'm so glad to finally meet some of these folks who I've been seeing online, and yourself included. So, I'm just going to let you take it away and tell us a little bit more about her creative side as expressed in her art and poetry.
Sure. Yeah. Hello. Oh man. Okay. So yeah, I guess I'm currently working on the reader. Yeah, it's going to be a selected writings, sort of. I mean, at this point, it's going to be pretty long, and there's a lot missing. A huge part of her practice was in theater playwriting, and those I've been able to find by using archive websites like the Wayback Machine, stuff like that, looking at things that she had uploaded to the internet herself, and which have disappeared otherwise. And I just found some new stuff last night, actually. So it's like an archaeological process, and the same with finding any of her books at this point, because she distributed them herself mostly. Working on that. Anybody who has any of her poetry chapbooks especially should reach out. That would be helpful. Let's see. So I guess, talking a little bit about how I came across Eugenia's work. I found her book, Sorcery and the UFO Experience, in the back room of a record store, maybe 8 years ago or so. Maybe, I don't know. It was maybe a month after she had died. I found this book, and that was my introduction to her. So I never had the chance to meet her physically in this world. But I was immediately struck by the subtlety and weirdness of her thought, and that carries through to every endeavor I think that I've seen that she's done. As a bookseller and book collector, I've kind of made it one of my main collecting missions is getting as much of her work as I can. So I thought part of my presentation would be showing what exactly I have of her work. During the process of making this reader, I've been so far working mostly on the fiction. And she has 3 main novels that have been published, at least. And those are Struck by Green Lightning, aka Project Midas. A really interesting novel about small town Indiana and strange happenings, sort of tracing the life of not the generations following the life of one guy, but also a sort of remote viewing project that comes to town, etc. That's a great novel. And then she has this pair of novels that she wrote, The Sin of Love and Om Nada. And these are really incredible novels, some of my favorite writing in general. I don't really know how to explain them. Very episodic. She has a writing style that you might at first glance think is amateurish or something like that. and there's definitely some typos due to like faulty OCR and technological issues that she faced a lot in her life. There was always some sort of haunting of her technological work. So there's all kinds of typos. Anyway, but they're really great novels. What else? Oh yeah. So the poetry. I mean, so I like to think of her work as it's sort of the same thing in every avenue she chooses to go down. It's always like done with the same energy or something like that. So you can read her work on the fluidized matrix. It's her physics work, which she was doing a lot toward the end of her life, I think. You can look at her paranormal research. You can look at her theater work. You can look at her paintings, her poetry, her novels, and it's all sort of probing the same questions of the nature of reality and what she defines as talismanic materialism in one of her papers. Just this notion of, and it's so tied into her fluidist work that there's this living intelligence and everything. It's kind of like a kind of animism, but sometimes with more like nefarious aspects as well. There was a lot of, I don't know if I would call it paranoia. I mean, I guess you could call it paranoia. There's nothing wrong with paranoia, and I think it comes with the territory too. When you devote yourself to, if you really give yourself to these things, to the psychic world, and trying to understand the nature of reality, you become a little paranoid. But there's a wisdom there too. In my own personal works, I've been endlessly inspired by Eugenia's stuff. I think the last several major things I've written myself in the world of poetry has been accompanied by an epigraph from one of Eugenia's things, often from one of her poems or something about the fluidist matrix. Also, I mean, I have a few of her paintings that I bought from Christina Varga, as Dr. Matthews mentioned, an artist that knew Eugenia and who ended up with a bunch of her paintings after she passed away. But I didn't want to do this live stream in my crowded, book haunted bedroom. It's too, yeah, no. But anyone who's interested, I can show you pictures of them. They're incredible living objects that carry this really intense spirit. You can learn something new from or see something new in every time you look at them. So it's hard to say where her like major work is. And because, I mean, right now in the process of doing the reader, I'm really focusing on her fiction. I'm trying to find a way to excerpt correctly from her novels, but I mean, she also wrote short stories. This might be my favorite book of hers. It's called Troll and Other Interdimensional Invasions. Troll and Other Interdimensional Invasions. Incredible book, which features sort of like the middle of it is this long, I don't really know if you would call it fiction. It's called the Captain Midnight Transmissions. I guess it's like playing with the idea of what fiction is, but is more or less autobiographical. E. Macer's story is a main character in it, who is also the narrator. So it's kind of like, also, this is a hole in my shirt. I'm not like, sorry. I don't have like schmutz on me or something. So, yeah, she's always playing with those boundaries between fiction and reality, which is one of my main interests in writing, is playing with that, because that's what you're always doing anyway. So doing that consciously, I think, is important. Let's see. And as for her poetry, yeah, I'm still looking for several of her early, especially her early chapbooks. But this is one of my favorites, Vanishing Questions, which she describes as metaphysical poetry, right? Often she'll ascribe a genre to her books of poetry, like love poems, and they're never really exactly what she describes them as. They're always just kind of like her thing, whatever that is, which is a great, the best thing ever, I think, the best style. Very, very strange. She does a lot with the page, right? For me, as a writer of poetry, I think it would be a little on the nose for me to read one of the poems. And as we've already had two of them read, so I'm going to skip that. But let's see, what else? As for genre, yeah, so her nonfiction is really a wide net of stuff. This is one of my favorites, which is a work of astrological theory, talking about the decans or deacons. I don't actually know how you pronounce that, but she channels each of these astrological facets, and it makes for like this very poetic, sort of strange reading experience. That, yeah, and this was also one of the only books of hers published by not herself. It was published by this Regency Press, along with this, her classic UFO book, Congratulations, The UFO Reality, was published by Crescent Publications. So, but other than that, much of her work was put out by Magic Mirror Communications, which was one of her, what would you call it? One of her publishing and, like a publishing venture. And then there's also Yankee Oracle, which was sort of the vehicle for the Yankee Oracle Gazette. And that was, I don't know how often it was. I think it was probably several times a year she would put out mostly writings by herself. Sometimes other people would submit. It was just like a cool little zine that she kept going until I think pretty late in her life. I think the last one that I've seen was 2010 or so. So she had all these things going on at once. She was presenting at like sort of fringe physics, conferences, like psionics, psychotronics, all that, radionics, all that kind of stuff. She was writing plays and directing and sort of producing them at the Theater for the New City in New York. She was attending poetry readings. She was having painting. So she was like this very active person who somehow through all that remained kind of inscrutable. And yeah, I mean, everything that I've been able to glean has been just by being like decent at scouring the internet and talking to people who have actually known her, two of whom are on this stream today. So I guess the last book she put out was the Bright Spidey Charm book, which is one of the strangest books I've ever read. It will jump around in time and like rearrange itself, creating these like you'll read something and then she'll take that exact same paragraph and put it later on in the book to recontextualize it. So it's a really interesting experiment in, I guess it's kind of autobiographical, but also like a sort of occult self-initiation type text where she's trying to figure out these talismanic branches that keep showing up on her property and other strange things like that, glyphs kind of like showing up in stone, etc. Is the connection bad? Is that true? Is that me? Someone said that on Facebook. Anyway, hopefully not. What else? So I would be happy to move on, and yeah.
Well, hey, thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
No, you've definitely. I don't want to say that you're obsessed, but
No, it's fine.
You're passionate about your interest and inspiration from Eugenia, and I think that's one of the greatest things about her is that I think she is very inspiring to a lot of people.
Totally.
And so certainly appreciate that. And I've shared with you our scans that we've received from friends of hers here at the Anomaly Archives. These different chapbooks. What's this? This one, Gypsy Fair poems by Eugenia Macer Story circa 1990, and The Strawberry Man and 27 love poems. And on the back of this one, The Gypsy Man, all 31 poems in this anthology are selected from poems read in performance, as you were saying, at a variety of locations, including, and I'm probably going to get these names wrong, Gansevoort Pier, Klinart Gallery, UMC Theater, Channel 6 Woodstock, Tinker Street Cinema, and Stone Soup Gallery, Boston. Some have been published in the Woodstock Times, Shadows Anthology, and as part of broadsheets distributed at fairs and theaters. So yeah, that again, she was voluminous, and she was constantly creating and had this amazing output of visual art, musical art, word poetry art, and so forth. So. Let's. I'm gonna go ahead and just give a brief description. Thank you, Ben, of my own backstory with her. So, as best as I've been able to reestablish from my archives, I must have become aware of her in the late 1990s, circa 1997 or 1998. A mutual friend of her and mine is my good friend Adam Gorightly, who many folks might know through his voluminous writings. And he had done, and I think this is also mentioned in Dr. Matthews' book, the chapter on Eugenia, where Gorightly interviewed Eugenia for a zine. And so in the mid 90s, I started publishing my own zine, ELF Infested Spaces, Journal of Possible Paradigms. And, that was what the great thing about zines is you trade them with other people who are putting them out. And so at some point, I became aware of her work and started contacting and communicating with her and got copies of, these are now part of the Anomaly Archives collection, which, is about a dozen books and, another dozen, other materials. This is her Magic Mirror and MUFON New York City newsletter. I'm still trying to figure out, was she actually like a state section director or any kind of leadership role in the local MUFON chapter there? I haven't been able to discern that. But then you also mentioned, Ben, the Yankee Oracle Gazette, which, yes, she did for a long time. At least one of these is circa 1998. And then going on through, I think, 2007 and onward. So, yes, this is something that she did for a long, long time. And so after I became friends with her in the late 90s, and my own print zine had migrated to the then just birthing World Wide Web internet, I started publishing my Elfis zine online at elfis.net, and that's where I started publishing her articles, and the ones that I published, I believe she may have written specifically for publication in the Elfis zine. She wrote a very long 2-part review of a conference called 1999's St. Kitts Hexhibition, reviewed in 2 parts. Those used to be online. I need to get them back up online. And then she did a very interesting article called Operation Abject, the Majestic Joker Turned Upside Down. And, this, she also then, circa spring, summer of 1999, we were still, friends and communicating, and she participated in a thing that I started for the magazine called Researcher Dialogue, where we would pose a question and a number of different researchers, Greg Bishop, conspiracy researcher Jim Keith, and others would chime in with their perspective on things. And I was, just early on very impressed with her perspective. We shared a lot of the same interests and areas and ideas about the nature of these phenomena, and it was probably her book, Sorcery and the UFO Experience, aka Dr. Fu Manchu and the Lonesome Cowboy, where I really started seeing some of her ideas that really resonated with me and my own ideas. And you can see some of her other interests kind of come through here. Of course, it is possible that UFO manifestations really are due to beneficent, highly intelligent beings such as masters, devas, angels, or scientific explorers from the United Planet of Alpha Centauri. A second possibility is that some of these manifestations are, as the gentleman from Salem warned, linked to powerful evil or satanic beings, pirates out of the jurisdiction of the United Planets. This seems embarrassingly like science fiction. However, it seems that we must search in the realms of what has previously been called impossible in order to find an explanation for events in the UFO area which have previously defied explanation. And she had the word impossible in quotes, and I immediately was reminded of Dr. Jeff Kripal at Rice University's Authors of the Impossible, and they're now Archives of the Impossible. And again, just like, well, she got it like well before. And then later on in the book, she says, when dealing with symbolic rather than specifically verbal information, it is easy to become enmeshed in a flexible quicksand of interpretations and interconnections which lead uncomfortably nowhere within the confines of this four-dimensional continuum. And there's just so many great quotes in this book. And we should, before going any further, I really wanted to share earlier this. This may be the only video that's currently online besides what apparently Ben found through the Wayback Machine. This footage was shot that I'm about to share with you was shot by Paul Kimball and his Red Star Films production company back in 2007 at the Oak Island Resort as part of a research investigation of the Oak Island mystery. So without further ado, this will give you a chance to see Eugenia moving and talking, and it's not the greatest copy of the video, but it's being used by permission, so here you go.
Do you have any intuition what's behind the paranormal tales, like the red-eyed dog and the lights and the time bleed-throughs related to Oak Island?
Yes, the basic fabric that's behind the tales of the paranormal on Oak Island and actually in the entire Mahone Bay area is that these things actually occur, and that people who normally are not terribly psychically cued will see them or will have time lapses or mental lapses also. This has also been described to me. People become disoriented, or it's a strange feeling. The reason is that the gravitational magnetic qualities of that entire Mahone Bay area, as well as Oak Island, cause this in the human mechanism. It facilitates the human mechanism to experience these things. It also probably facilitates materialization of intelligence on a certain level. But it's all of these dimensions working together. And the Canadian government, by the way, has investigated the Mahone Bay area and the Hudson Bay area and offshore to the northeast past Newfoundland. There's a undersea anomaly called the Orpheus anomaly, where the continental shelf drops way, way down, and there are many things seen over the sea there and so forth.
So I continued my friendship with her and on into the new the new era 2000 on, and it was in the year 2000 that I accepted responsibility for hosting the 38th annual National UFO Conference for the summer of 2001 to be hosted here in Austin, Texas, and it was going to be a 3-day, 3-night extravaganza with lectures, workshops, live music by local bands, and some movie and documentary presentations. And I immediately thought of her as somebody who I absolutely had to have on the list of presenters. And it was my opportunity to finally meet her face to face. And so that was scheduled for mid September 2001. And so I had her lined up to perform some music on the second session in the evening of Friday, September 14th, doing quote-unquote multi-dimensional music, and then also the next day on Saturday, September 15th, for the third session during the day, she was going to do two things as part of the alternate paradigms for the UFO phenomena portion of the conference, and she was going to give a presentation called Configurational Time, Conceptual and Sensory Perception of Multidimensional Events. Here again is what Stephanie and others have commented on, her ability to really appreciate the way that human perception works and how it might interact with psychic clairvoyant abilities that she had and that others experience in these strange phenomena. And then she was also going to be part of a panel discussion, question and answer, alternate paradigms for anomalous events and experiences, that was going to feature her, David Perkins, a cattle mutilation researcher, the amazing Robert Anton Wilson, the singer Pamela Stonebrook, my good friend Greg Bishop, psychedelic mushroom researcher James Arthur, Britain's Jenny Randalls, and a local remote viewer named Eric Stearns. But unfortunately, as most of y'all know, that didn't happen because of the events of September 11th, 2001. But she had just in the month before prepared a really rough sounding cassette tape for me to know what exactly to expect with her multidimensional music. And so just real quick here, I'm going to play a couple of clips that embody that. So here we go.
Studio recording at the Magic Mirror Communications Studios in Woodstock, New York on August 13th, 2001. With Eugenia Macer's story on vocal and guitar, and Magic Mirror Communication Studio musicians on drum and keyboard. All songs have been composed by Eugenia Macer's story and were part of plays previously produced, with the exception of the last song of the set, which was specially written for the New FOC UFO conference in Austin, Texas. Light keeps falling through the holes in the sky. Light keeps falling through the holes in the sky. Light keeps falling through the holes in the sky. On the intergalactic line. Well, I like to lie on the seat while I ride. I like to lie on the seat while I ride. I like to lie on the seat while I ride. Watch the light fall through the sky. I've got a penny with a Jupiter sign. I've got a penny with a Jupiter sign. I've got a penny with a Jupiter sign. Better believe the penny is mine.
penny with the Jupiter sign. I've got a penny with the Jupiter sign. I've got a penny with the Jupiter sign. Better believe the penny is mine.
Okay, so I've been informed that there's a terrible echo that people are hearing with regards to the audio I'm playing, so I guess I'm not going to play that next clip, which was the very, very distorted. I'm pretty sure she recorded this like on an actual boombox. Any of y'all remember those? But so anyway, I didn't know Eugenia that closely. We corresponded on a semi-regular basis. There'd be long lapses in our correspondence, but she was somebody that I felt was near and dear to my heart because of her perspective and because of the challenges faced by somebody who's experiencing psychic clairvoyant experiences and also paranormal and other type of haunting and UFO close encounter type phenomena. And I think she really understood that, and it must not have been easy to live with these strange experiences. And there certainly were times where I was more than a little intimidated by her. Just one last little thing here, she was absolutely psychic. She was clairvoyant. She definitely scared the bejesus out of me and some other close friends on a number of occasions with her amazing ability to sense things remotely. So I'm going to read this quote here from my this friend I mentioned, Adam Go Rightly, from his book Happy Trails to High Weirdness, that kind of exemplifies this sort of thing. He says, "My first inkling of this apparent paranormal conspiratorial doppelganger phenomena came courtesy of longtime correspondent, the psychic and playwright Eugenia Macer Story, when she commented to me via email several years ago about her curious encounter with an Adam Go Rightly doppelganger at a late 90s East Coast New Age conference. What this all means, then and now, remains a continuing enigma, whether this alleged Go Rightly double sighting was actually some sort of paranormal happening, an alphabet soup spy in disguise, or something more mundane and explainable. Eugenia, it should be noted, is not only psychic in title, but one of those rare and genuine psychics I've encountered who are few and far between, tuned into hidden frequencies and wavelengths that us normals hardly ever hear or see. Our third eye vision impeded by the veil of reality. Eugenia is one of those unique souls who can lift that veil upon occasion and see beyond. I recall quite profoundly during the late 90s visiting a medical specialist in San Francisco regarding certain neurological problems I was then experiencing. Later, when I returned home and checked my mail, I discovered a synchronistically psychic message from Eugenia, which informed me that at the very moment I was entering the medical facility in San Francisco, Eugenia was stepping onto the subway train when an image of yours truly, Adam Go Rightly, suddenly appeared in her mind with the words, San Francisco. Of course, Eugenia, all away across the country on the East Coast, had no way of knowing that I would be traveling to San Francisco on this matter. These are the type of synchronistic events that occur when one wanders into the mystic sphere of Eugenia Macer's Story, who, due to her psychic abilities, may have unconsciously summoned that aforementioned Go Rightly doppelganger well over a decade ago. All right, well, let's bring all of our guests back on, and thank you for sticking with us, folks. I know this. I think we kind of originally planned for this to be an hour and a half. We're already at an hour and 40. But I definitely want to give us a little bit more chance to interact with each other and discuss things that we might not have remembered to bring up in our individual talks. And sorry for the echo or any of the bad audio. There's so much about this. As many times as I do tests and so forth, things just don't always work the way you expect. So. And yes, I have also going in the background, and I think this may be the source of the echo. I'm not sure. I'm doing a screen share where I've got a loop of pictures of her and her books going. So, and I think actually, you know what? I can probably fix that. Hold on. So folks, what did we miss?
Well, Mackenzie had a couple of questions, and I want to address where he says, finally, do you think it would be fair to say that the fluidus matrix corresponds to the medium through which sympathetic magic, as described by Fraser, works? That is exactly the argument that she is making, as well as some other like PK effects and everything. But she specifically uses the example of, I think it's Rolling Thunder, a shaman stroking the belly of a beetle with a twig to control the weather or get a storm brewing. But she has another quote here that I wrote down that I like to read, because she talks about how it's not necessarily a precise thing. She says, the attention of the shaman, male or female, may, like the lightning storm, fork off in a multitude of directions, causing electronic outages or fires, as well as bringing needed rain. And Dr. Matthews, when you were talking about Keel earlier and the similarities of their thinking, when Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, was republished because of the movie, he had a new forward on that where he talks about him thinking that getting a lot of communication from like Wiccans and occult practitioners, and how him thinking that they had a lot of insight into the events that unfolded around Point Pleasant back then. And I thought that was interesting when she's talking about, you know, it's kind of like you could charge this fluidized matrix, this, you know, kind of extra dimensional living force that can cause non-local effects, but just charging it up with the sympathetic magic. But then you're not really sure, is it kind of come out as like a Mothman or what? You know, you're trying to do one thing, but it could have all these unintended consequences. So I hope that. And as far as Plato and the other thing you asked, Mackenzie, I don't know enough to say, or the Kabbalah structure. I don't know. Maybe you know, Carol Wham.
Well, I would say, based on the question that she asked or he asked about, let's see, what is it? About Yesod.
Yeah.
I would say that based on what I understand about all this, about that, is that I would say that that particular realm would be the last phase of what she's talking about. She's talking about what's happening behind manifestation and the associations that are occurring due to that. Let me summarize it really briefly. The easiest way to explain this is to understand that energy and consciousness are not separate, but rather energy is a function of consciousness. The atoms of any physical structure are held together by complex energy relationships, which in this instance automatically entails that consciousness is also involved. When more energy or focus is added to these structures, changes will occur, not only at the level of substance, but also in consciousness. We see the physical aspect of this happen every time we light a match or boil water. More energy is added to a substance, actually to its atoms, and that causes a change in the distribution of atoms, resulting in changes to the state of the substance itself. Energy, which is consciousness that is directed in certain ways, can so alter the structure of certain substances that it might be able to create controlled paranormal effects or affects, even on space-time, since time is a component that is taken into account mathematically, even at the atomic level, which I think, Stephanie, you were alluding to there. The physical manifestation of affects and effects is more directly tied to associative rather than linear effects. Another matter follows thought. In a sense, physical materialization of anything, even the most mundane things we encounter every day, is one way in which consciousness communicates with itself through beings that imagine themselves to be separate from one another. Those beings are, of course, us. Skilled consciousness operatives who historically have been referred to as magicians, sorcerers, or shamans learn various techniques of controlling this process and can even facilitate attacks, coincidences, and other effects, affects intended to influence or control others, even if only at the level of perception. Therefore, for Eugenia, the best and truest way to become aware of the fluidus matrix is to keep track of coincidences, synchronicities, dreams, and other associative activities throughout one's everyday life. And one of her inspirations in this, by the way, which I did forget to mention, because she does mention this in a couple of her writings, is the work of Jane Roberts, specifically in the books, who channeled Seth, specifically in the books Unknown Reality. It's a 2-volume set. And those are the only Seth materials that she mentions by name and that she talked to me a little bit about. And I think she had some suspicion of Jane herself, simply because she was always suspicious of anyone who allowed themselves to be possessed. She sort of had an issue with that. But I think that she did find some of the information in the Unknown Reality to be useful, because there is some very specific information that is given there about the connection between consciousness and the spins of electrons, and a lot of the stuff that she actually dealt with personally and worked with. So I think that she was inspired to some degree by some of the language. She developed her own language to explain all of this. But that's what, if people are interested in sort of looking at other related kinds of concepts, you might check out Unknown Reality, volumes 1 and 2 of the Seth material, because there are some similar concepts in those books. And those are the most technical, actually, of the Seth books. But let's see, there was only one other thing I was going to talk about, but maybe it went away because it should. Oh, I know what it was. Very brief. It's what led to the writing of this book. Eugenia led to the writing of this book, by the way. Because I decided to write this book after I decided to write about her specifically. So these are the synchronicities that occurred. The chapter that I wrote about Eugenia in this book is the first thing that I wrote for the book. And I began working on it the very day that I decided to go ahead with this project. That very same day, within an hour, I began an online search for any of her published articles. Within 20 minutes, I had not only located 5 articles which had only just been archived by 5 different online publications. Like literally, they had just been archived. One of them was a Russian journal, and they had only just archived their copy of one of her papers. But I had also connected with a young man, Ben, who had launched his own search for material on, by, and about Eugenia. It was through a Craigslist that he had put a Craigslist ad. And a mutual acquaintance of both of us, and that was you, Smiles, both of us had put a notice on Eugenia's memorial Facebook page. So it was through my decision to write my first chapter in a book about paranormal experience in the Hudson Valley. And by the way, she moved to the Hudson Valley because she believed that the Hudson Valley was one of those places, very specifically, that Stephanie was talking about. But it was when I made that decision, within 20 minutes, I met Ben, and Smiles had indicated to me that Ben was that you guys knew of each other, and I had found 5 articles of hers which literally had been archived like within hours prior to me deciding this. So I consider that a raft of synchronicities. So there you are. I hold her responsible for the book.
That's right.
I did want to acknowledge the thanks that we've got from listeners. Local friend Ions Austin, I know who this is thanking us for doing this presentation. And one of the people who's been commenting throughout, Jim Hale, asks, "Are we familiar with mathematician Donald Hoffman?" And yes, it was the TED Talk that he alludes to here that I'm familiar with. That it has to do with this idea that his research indicates that human perception, it's actually the higher the accuracy of representation of your exterior world, it has lower survival value, which you would think would be the opposite of that.
No, you wouldn't.
Well, I would. I mean, if there's a tiger, I think it behooves my perceptual devices to
That's
accurately.
The thing. Your perceptual devices are driven by the need to perceive tigers and not the wallpaper.
So,
that's what you're saying, right?
So, but this is very much something that was a part of I believe Eugenia's understanding of the nature of reality, the nature of humans experiencing of it, and the faulty interface, but that can be tuned. And if you you were saying also, Dr. Matthews, about how there should be this recording of those synchronicities. And this gets to my oldest adage of I think the world would be a better place if people paid more attention to their dreams and wrote down their dreams and these kinds of synchronicities. And while I certainly think it can become a paranoid, obsessive type of situation for some people, and again, no disrespect to Eugenia, there were plenty of things that she wrote or said that made me go, gosh, I don't think she's seeing the forest for the trees in this case. Sometimes to very hilarious effect, but she would see other things that I absolutely was like, oh my gosh, that's the most perceptive thing I've ever, seen somebody come away with from, some seemingly innocuous thing. And that's why I really respected her ability, as best as I knew her, to seemingly keep one foot in the other realm and one foot here, and to communicate what she was witnessing to the rest of us. And I that's why I think she's such a powerful person to focus on for a presentation like this. And I really thank you all for your contributions here. I'm not sure what else there is to say at this point, and we don't probably want to go past the 2-hour mark, but Ben has put the call out for more material. I've provided on behalf of the Anomaly Archives what I could impart to him, hopefully in the service of seeing her material reprinted. And I certainly, the Anomaly Archives is always interested in receiving more materials as an archival preservationist effort for her work. As I say, we've got a number of her books, multiple copies of a couple of her books, and including some of the poetry and these amazing articles. And what I was going to play for y'all, some clips from my 2008 interview with her, which she touched on a number of things, not least of which was again these events throughout her life where she would write down note, like there's an example in our interview where she talks about working with her theater group, and they at some point confront her with the fact that the notes she'd been writing on the script or the screenplay notes had very profound, personal, deep meaning and significance to the other people about things in their life that were not privy or public to her. And she just kind of shrugs it off as like, I guess I was just, psychically grokking things about them, and I think that's the mark of a true psychic often. So, or in another case, when I asked her about if she was familiar with the Bohemian Grove mythos, she said no, but I did write a play that involves an owl statue that has connections to the devil. And afterwards, somebody came up to me and said, "How did you know about that?" and got all accusatory. And it's just like, who knows? So,
well, I don't know, because Bohemian Grove is interested. Because I live not too far from there, and it's in a very interesting place geologically, along the Russian River as it's heading towards the sea, this very dramatic coastline there where you just have these huge differentials in altitude, which she talked about as being very associated with these anomalous areas. So it's interesting that you have this place with the whole kind of weirdness and rumor and secrecy around it that's located in an area that matches up with a lot of the stuff that she was identifying as activating the fluidized matrix, and then she ends up receiving this information for her play. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, like I said, I think we should probably wrap this up, but I want to thank everybody again for tuning in and listening, and especially each of our presenters, Dr. C.S. Matthews, Stephanie Quick, Ben Roylance. Thank you so much. Again, highly recommend Dr. Matthews' book, Mysterious Beauty, Living with the Paranormal in the Hudson Valley, and you can contact her through what website?
Well, it's actually easier to contact me through my, I've got a Gmail account. It's
Okay.
Professor Wham 1, just the numeral. Professor Wham, the Wham is WHAM, Professor Wham 1 at gmail.com.
Great. And Stephanie's blog, I'm always going to get this wrong. I love it, but Ghost Dog is a
Ghost Dog is a mystery box.
You can do a search for that, and that'll come up. And Ben's Aport Used Books is on Instagram and other locations on the internet. And any other contact info anybody wants to give out, now's the time. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. We'll be back next month for another Anomaly Archives monthly meetup. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, we'll be starting soon a new weekly news roundup and also an interview series. So you'll be seeing some of these same faces doing more in-depth interviews. And thank you all for tuning in. Good night.